Hey everybody, it's Professor Snard here checking in for our Intro to Creative Writing class, our English 2250 course. In the second 8-week format, pretty compressed, doing everything kind of twice as fast as we normally would. I'm back in my office. If you watched my first video, it was a little clunky. I was traveling, so the internet setup's not great. My schedule is not the usual thing, so this is a little more of a regular, normal check-in. I'm going to actually repeat a few of the things, just sort of course navigation-wise from that first video, but also take a quick look at kind of where we're headed to next in our class. So just popping into our due dates here. It is Wednesday the 17th when I'm recording this. So you should have finished up everything in Unit 1 except for replies. And Unit 2, again, because of that 8-week format, we're just moving a little bit more quickly, actually a lot more quickly right up front. But that actually helps us not to have to race through some of the rest of the class once we get through this, some of the earlier stuff here. So Units 1 and 2, everything is in the books and done, except for any reply components that then you have that sort of extra buffer time till Thursday to complete. Obviously, if enough people complete initial work early, you can certainly get in there and do your 2 or 4 replies or whatever the assignment calls for before this due date. So it's completely possible that you've wrapped everything up for both of these units already as I record this on Wednesday. What you'll probably find, though, is that in a typical unit to unit or due date to due date crossover, you might obviously be finished, initial stuff. You still might be doing this, but you're already, actually, we'd sort of be finished here. You're already looking forward to what's due. In this case, again, we're going to try to tackle 2 units before our next due date of Tuesday, October 23rd. So you might actually be finishing this up, but still are already jumping into that next unit. So there's a little bit of overlap, even as we move from our set of 2 units, 1 and 2, that we've just finished, to our next set of 3 and 4. And as you can see, we don't always double up the units. Like I said, we do that up front to give ourselves a little bit more of a cushion once we get into more of the content of our course, especially as we get to our workshops. And really, this whole course is designed around the workshop model. So as is explained over here, if you've been through it, how the workshops work, the idea of the workshop is we break into groups. Those vary in size depending on what's going on, but we'll break into smaller groups than just our whole class. Obviously, each person in the workshop group writes a piece of fiction, or we'll do poetry. We have other genres that we cover, but our first one is fiction. So everybody writes basically a short story. It should be more or less complete, beginning, middle, and end, but we know that it's just a work in progress. It's not something that you as the author think is perfectly polished and finished, and I don't want to make any changes to this. That, in fact, defeats the purpose of workshop. Everyone will then share your work with your group. You'll get feedback from all of your group members, and it's through that process, repeated throughout our course, that hopefully you develop most as a writer. Maybe you get some tips and tricks or ideas from me or from other course readings or activities that we're doing. Certainly the whole rules of creative writing I really stand by as some pretty generic ideas about writing, but it's really through the practice of putting those into place, like actually trying some of the theory in a real short story or a poem or whatever, that you actually get better at writing. And writing is, first of all, it's like a skill, not something you're either born to do or born not to do, which some people think. But like a skill like riding a bike, playing a sport, playing a musical instrument, it's one that you get better with practice. So we don't start out as good as we're ever going to be. And there's usually no magic secret that makes you go from sort of a novice or emerging writer to a publishing poet or a professional, journalist or whatever the case might be. We make incremental steps. Sometimes what we write is actually worse than stuff we've written before, and that's part of that longer process. And I think writing, unlike some other skills, though it's still a skill, is one that really takes a long time to unfold. And so that's why our course is really set up the way it is. I really value the workshop model as a way for us to share work, to interact, to grow as writers. but also the whole grading system is not about you writing a short story and me evaluating it as an A, B, a C, a whatever. That's really not what our course is about. So if you haven't already, I would invite you to spend some time in the how the workshops work area and a note on feedback, right? Sort of what you can expect from me, just as an initial out of the gate thing. So you sort of understand, like, conceptually, philosophically, how we're entering into this course. Especially the note on feedback. I don't provide a ton of feedback as we go, especially in our compressed format. It would take like forever for me to get that feedback back to you. And it's not always valuable to people. It's not what they're looking for. And so I tend to put the feedback ball back into your court. If you want it from me, by all means reach out. I am more than happy to meet with you, like virtually or face-to-face, or to give you much more substantial feedback. But I'm going to let you reach out to me for that, not assume that everybody wants that, and then I'm trying to churn out like a novel's worth of stuff in very limited time to keep, you know, everything sort of up to date. So you'll obviously get a grade, probably a few comments or explanation, but don't think that's the end of the story. You can always reach out to me for more of that. And what I'm kind of looking for or grading on is, again, something that you can discover here in the discussion board grading, so sort of the quality of posts and replies, and then, of course, how the workshops work, and sort of like when you write your short story and submit it for your workshop group, where is the grade being generated? I'm not going to go through all that right now. I want to keep this a little bit shorter, but really, like, definitely worth your while to check into that if you haven't already. Okay, so we've wrapped up our first couple of units, again, just sort of getting introduced to each other, setting some stuff up, thinking about some global pictures, right, big pictures about writing and why we each do it, making sure that you've looked at the rules of creative writing and done that quiz. Again, stuff that is sort of easier to look at or talk about conceptually, right, in theory. It's really in the putting that into practice, and sometimes we don't get it right, but that's actually okay. One of the nice things about the grading scheme for our class is that you can try things, try doing things differently in your writing. That's actually part of the point, right? But not to be punished for that if it doesn't go perfectly the first time. That would be a pretty unrealistic expectation. All right, so let's take a look at Unit 3. The language of analogy. So not quite into like writing a short story yet, but sort of still building that foundation for us. Just to remind, as I'd covered before, maybe a little bit quickly, that most of our units are set up very similarly as far as the tools that we're using. So again, we have this scrollable document/assignment here that you can find in Blackboard. It's inviting you to create a new portfolio page. So you're going back to your student website that you created in Unit 1. And then, again, we use the discussion board tool in Blackboard so we can see that this is a clickable link. So whatever work that you're doing here in your portfolio is to make sure that we wrap it up by making sure that you post right to this discussion board. This is a sort of a fun one here where everybody's finding an interesting like a short story prompt. Just Google this stuff. You can really find pretty fun and interesting things here. And then building out your portfolio to post that prompt. And then we're actually going to follow up with this in the next unit, which is why it has this sort of units 2/3, where you'll be actually responding and doing some writing based on the prompts that people provide. So I'm just looking at this now, and it says to do a reply piece here, but I'm going to revisit this here so it's a little bit clear when that actually is going to show up. We'll see it in Unit 3, actually, which I'm going to go to in just a second. And then we're going to talk or look at the language of analogy, so that sort of figurative language like simile, metaphor, terms that we would have seen described or defined back in our earlier units, but a very common figure of speech that we show up in many kinds of literature. Comparisons using like or as, the simile, or just direct comparison that doesn't use like or as, simile, metaphor. Those are really like one of the most fundamental building blocks for really any kind of creative writing. And I could get into why it's so important, but I won't do that here. You can probably already sort of know, or you can intuit, your gut tells you that these are important things for us. So there's sort of a funny / cringeworthy moment here. Less funny, definitely cringeworthy moment here that we can look at just to sort of set the stage. And then our next assignment. Again, using the discussion board tool in Blackboard, but having you work through the text of this assignment here is actually much longer than the text of what you're going to produce, and we do have a reply component. So really you're just looking for a simile or analogy in a book or a movie or a song that you know that is meaningful to you or interesting for you. So don't just Google like analogies or similes in literature. It needs to be something that you can find in a book, in some lyrics that you already know, that's from a song or from a text that means something to you. So you're reflecting sort of your own interest here. And we want to figure out how that source has used this really fundamental literary building block of the comparison using like or as. And I'm even going to take it one step further here by asking you to put that metaphor simile into this kind of a formula. So similes, metaphors tend to work best when they take an abstract thing, a thing that's like hard to think about, hard to know in great detail because it's so big, it's so complex, it's so whatever, so philosophical, but it's being compared to a very concrete thing, a thing that we do know, a thing that's from our everyday life. So not every single simile works exactly like this, but if you find something that you want to use as an example and it doesn't really fit this format, it's possible you found something that is a figure of speech but is not actually a simile, or not actually what we're looking for. And so that's why the famous phrase from the movie Forrest Gump, "Life is like a box of chocolates," a bit of a cliche now because of that movie, but is actually a really good example of how we could build or fill in the formula pieces here. So the abstract thing is life, clearly, is being compared to, is like a box of chocolates. So a perfect example, right? This big concept, a big unknowable, complicated thing, but is being framed for us in a way that is much more knowable. And of course, it's not just a one-off thing, right? We now can think about like, well, how does that work? Why is it like that? Because there's a lot of variety. You never know what you're going to get. I almost did the accent for you there. So it goes beyond just that first level and just the statement of a thing is like another thing. There actually is some comparative value to it. So I want this exercise to be authentic. You don't just Google simile in literature and then you give me something from The Great Gatsby because like that's a book that you heard exists, or maybe you read it a billion years ago. Make it something that is authentic to you, and make sure that what you find is a simile, that it fits into, and you reproduce in your post for the discussion board this actual formula that we're going to use here. You can read through the rest of it and then notice that there is the reply component. This is a really fun one because people discover all sorts of interesting similes they didn't know about, but also shared interests, whether it's books or music or whatever, or people discover a great simile in a song that they love the song, but they never even realized it hinges on this whole like simile or comparative language thing. So it's a really fun exercise. Okay, going to jump really quickly into unit. Let's see, unit 4. I realized the labeling in here is wrong. Wait a sec. Okay. Rewind some of what I just said. Sorry. This is where I got that part confused. This is where we've done the prompt. So ignore what I said before. This whole getting ahead and being out of whack as I started is like catching up with me here. So we've done the writing prompt part. Now in unit 3, this is why it's 2-3. Now we're going to do the responding to the prompt. So there is the reply component. All right. Sorry if that wasn't clear. I'll make sure that it's clear. Within the units, I think it's probably actually clearer than what I just made it. So, yeah. Moving on. The joys of the 8-week format. Where was I? Language of analogy, we just talked about that. Life is like a box of chocolates, a very confused, melted box of chocolates right now. And now we're into unit 4. Okay. Some short story terms to look at. Nothing to really do here, but just some content to absorb as part of our class. And these, again, like, is there going to be a multiple choice quiz on these? No, not exactly. But there's certainly ideas that you want to think about and put into practice as we do the writing for the class. So what kind of character are you using? Have you attended to setting? The Freytag's pyramid here, the basic structure of a short story. Do you have actual rising action? Is there something that actually happens in your story? How do these pieces actually work? So again, nothing to do here, but just content to read and understand. Short stories to read, again, stuff that you've got to do, embedded right in our class here. This is the nice part about not having the textbook. Famous short story called Hands by Sherwood Anderson from his collection, Winesburg, Ohio. And then one that you've certainly heard of before, probably even read maybe, The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. Super creepy, just in time for Halloween. Perfect. So a couple stories to read, and obviously what I want you to do is read these stories looking for the application, the manipulation of some of these short story ideas. So if we go back here, we see that this particular literary theorist, Freytag, he proposed this kind of basic pyramid structure for a short story actually derived from how a 5-act play would work. But it's not prescriptive. It's not like every story must have this perfectly balanced, symmetrical division between each of the parts. So what I want you to look for as you read the short stories here is not, did these authors like follow the rules, quote unquote. What we're looking for is how did the authors manipulate those various ideas or rules or concepts and put them into place differently in their two short stories, right? And then we have a collaborative slide deck assignment. We'll all be working in the same set of slides, so be careful not to, delete stuff or change the theme or whatever. And again, there'll be a bunch of terms that you'll see here. This is just sort of building our shared vocabulary. Your job is to find some terms that haven't been defined, and then go ahead and define them, and per the instructions, make sure you provide some examples, some reference to resources if you look these terms up. So again, you're only doing a couple of definitions, but as a whole set deck of slides here, we have a really good sort of glossary, right? A set of terms defined that we can go back to as a group. So again, just be careful when you're doing your own in here, because you will be working where lots of others are working too. We can see that a bunch of folks have been here already, but there's still lots of terms that can still be defined. And more for the convenience of grading, but also just replying. We have it set up as a discussion board, so you're going to go in, you're going to just post what terms you defined. You don't have to redefine them. You can literally like cut and paste from your slide deck. It makes for easy grading because it's all compiled for me. But then I'm also asking you to reply to a couple of terms that other people have done, again, to sort of expose us to a wider range of terminology than just the ones that you individually might have defined within our slide deck. Okay, so sorry to rush through it. I'm trying to keep these shorter. Even this one is run pretty long. Again, our due date structure in the 8-week term just causes a lot of kind of anxiety. Like I'm kind of sweating here a little bit right up front, because we have so much due that we're trying to get under our belts before we can take a little bit of a break as we get here, which gives us much more time to do what I think is the more valuable pieces of the class in terms of you becoming a better writer. Defining a bunch of terms is helpful, but long term, doing actual fiction writing, poetry writing, etc., that's where you as a writer are really going to develop the most. So if you're confused about due dates or what's going on within our class, by all means be in touch with me. Hopefully these, and especially when I can sort of calm down a little bit and not try to race through much stuff, hopefully these videos will be helpful just walking us through what's going on. But again, especially if I've confused matters for you because of my mix-up with what's going on in units 2 and 3 and the sort of crossover here. By all means, be in touch and I can clarify things. We can meet face-to-face, we can meet virtually, we can go back and forth by email. So I'm totally here to make sure everyone is comfortable, situated in the class, just like how it all works, but also, of course, to help with the content piece of it, especially as we get deeper. All right, so hopefully it's feeling good so far. It gets even more fun as we go, as we get into more of the writing assignments that we'll be doing. And I'll check in with everybody in the next couple of days, again, just to sort of keep us on track as best I can.